Lena adjusted her uniform for the 100th time that evening, her hands trembling as she stepped into the glittering dining hall of the Starlight Serenade. The room was a marvel of opulence, chandeliers dripping with crystals, gilded railings, and polished floors that reflected the soft, golden glow of the ambient lights. It was a far cry from the small, cluttered apartment she left behind, where her twins, Ethan and Ava, waited for her return. She had taken this job out of desperation, clutching onto the hope of clearing the mountain of debt that had haunted her for years. Every step Lena took reminded her of why she was here, to rebuild the life that had been stolen from her. As she approached a table, tray in hand, her world tilted on its axis. There, sitting with a stunning woman draped in jewels, was Adrian. Her husband. The man who had been declared dead 7 years ago. Lena froze, the tray slipping slightly in her hands. She blinked rapidly, convinced her exhaustion was playing tricks on her. But no, there was no mistaking him. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the confident laugh that echoed in her ears. It was him. Her breath hitched, and she stumbled back, retreating to the safety of the kitchen. Heart pounding, Lena leaned against the cool metal counter, gripping its edge as if it could anchor her to reality. Adrian was alive. The memories came flooding back in a torrent, overwhelming her. She saw them sitting together on their worn-out couch, his hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly as they dreamed about their future as a family. The devastating phone call replayed in her mind, the police officer's voice solemn as he explained that Adrian's car had gone off the bridge. His body was never recovered, but the evidence left little doubt. She remembered screaming, the crushing grief, and the days that followed, filled with unbearable loneliness and fear for the future. Most of all, Lena remembered the debt collectors who arrived soon after. Adrian had left behind a web of financial troubles, and as his legal next of kin, they fell squarely on her shoulders. Pregnant and alone, she had been forced to sell nearly everything they owned, scraping together just enough to survive. And yet, here he was, alive and laughing, as if the past 7 years hadn't existed. The pain was quickly replaced by anger. How could he have abandoned her? Their children? The betrayal cut deeper than any debt collector's threats ever had. Her chest heaved as she tried to calm herself. "I need to finish my shift," she whispered, but her resolve faltered as she glanced through the kitchen's window at the dining hall. Adrian leaned back in his chair, a glass of wine in his hand, utterly at ease in this world of wealth. Beside him, the woman, elegant and poised, touched his arm, and Lena felt a sharp pang of resentment. Her mind raced. Had he faked his death? Why? And why hadn't he come back to them? To her? To Ethan and Ava? The questions clawed at her, demanding answers. The sound of the chef barking orders snapped her back to the present. She couldn't afford to fall apart here, not in front of the other staff. Forcing her hands to steady, she picked up another tray and stepped out into the dining hall. But her eyes found Adrian again, as if drawn to him by an invisible thread. This time, he turned slightly, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of the chandelier. Her heart ached at how familiar, and yet alien he seemed. As the evening wore on, Lena barely managed to get through her duties. She caught herself staring at him too often, her emotions swinging wildly between disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. By the end of the shift, Lena knew she couldn't leave it unresolved. She had to confront him. She needed answers, not just for herself, but for Ethan and Ava, who had grown up fatherless because of his supposed death. But the questions weighed heavily on her. Would he recognize her? Would he even care? As the passengers filtered out of the dining hall, Lena slipped into the shadows near the exit, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. She had spent 7 years mourning him, struggling to survive in a world that had turned cruel and unrelenting. And now, here he was, alive and thriving in a life she had never been a part of. When Adrian finally stepped into view, laughing softly with the woman on his arm, Lena's breath caught. She took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Adrian!" He stopped dead in his tracks. His laughter ceased, and the color drained from his face as he turned to face her. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. "It's me," Lena said, her voice trembling. "It's Lena." Adrian's expression shifted. Shock, confusion, and something darker flickered across his face. The woman beside him frowned, looking between the two of them. Lena's heart broke all over again as she saw his lips tighten. In that moment, she realized the man standing before her was no longer the Adrian she had once known. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for Adrian to say something, anything. But the man she had loved, the man she had mourned, simply stared at her with a coldness that sent a shiver down her spine. "Lena," he finally said, his voice low and clipped. The sound of her name on his lips was like a dagger twisting in her heart. The woman at his side, her perfect features twisted in confusion, tugged at his arm. "Who is this?" she asked sharply, her tone more annoyed than curious. Lena opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her shock was too overwhelming. Adrian's face hardened, and he turned away, as if she were nothing more than a ghost from a past he had already buried. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said curtly. "You must be mistaken." The dismissal hit her like a physical blow. She stood frozen as Adrian and the woman brushed past her, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. Tears pricked Lena's eyes, but she forced herself to hold them back. Not here. Not now. She couldn't afford to fall apart, not when her shift wasn't even over. She retreated to the small staff locker room, locking herself in one of the stalls. Her hands shook as she gripped the edges of the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. 7 years? She whispered to herself, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. 7 years of struggling, of mourning, and he's alive? Pretending like we don't exist? The memories of those years came rushing back with brutal clarity. After Adrian's supposed death, Lena's life had descended into chaos. The day the police had knocked on her door to deliver the news, she had crumpled to the floor, clutching her swollen belly. The grief had been unbearable, a suffocating weight that pressed down on her chest. But there had been no time to grieve properly. Debt collectors had arrived just days after the funeral, demanding payment for loans she hadn't even known Adrian had taken out. The amounts were staggering, far beyond what she could manage on her own. Her meager savings evaporated quickly, and soon she found herself selling anything of value: her engagement ring, their furniture, even Adrian's prized watch. Even as she fought to keep a roof over her head, the pressure had been relentless. Loan sharks began showing up at all hours, their threats becoming more aggressive with each visit. Lena remembered one night vividly, when a man had pounded on her door so violently that she had hidden in the closet, trembling, with her hands protectively cradling her belly. Her breaking point had come one evening at the diner where she worked double shifts. She had felt lightheaded all day, but she had ignored it, determined to make it through her shift. Then, as she carried a tray of food to a table, everything had gone black. When she woke up in the hospital, the doctor had been blunt. "You're underweight, overworked, and dangerously stressed," he had said. "If you don't start taking care of yourself, you're putting your babies at risk." Those words had been a wake-up call. From that moment on, Lena had resolved to keep going, no matter what. Her twins, Ethan and Ava, became her lifeline. The moment she held them in her arms for the first time, she knew she couldn't give up. But the years that followed were far from easy. Lena worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs to make ends meet. She sacrificed sleep, her own health, and any semblance of a social life to provide for her children. She shielded them from the darkness of their reality, always putting on a brave face even when the weight of it all threatened to crush her. The loan sharks, however, never stopped. Their threats escalated, their demands becoming more impossible to meet. When they showed up one evening with an ultimatum: pay the full amount by the end of the month or face dire consequences, Lena had felt a new kind of fear. It wasn't just her life at stake anymore. That fear was what had driven her to accept the job aboard the Starlight Serenade. The pay was better than anything she could earn working 3 jobs on land. It had seemed like her only chance to dig herself out of the hole Adrian had left her in. And now, here he was, alive and thriving, as if none of it had ever happened. The pain of his rejection twisted in her chest, but beneath it, a fire began to burn. He had stolen 7 years of her life, leaving her to suffer while he lived in luxury. She couldn't let him get away with it, not after everything she had endured. As Lena wiped her eyes and straightened her uniform, a new determination took hold. She would get the answers she deserved, no matter what it took. Adrian couldn't erase her or their children from his life so easily. The next morning, Lena awoke early, though sleep had been elusive. Her mind had raced all night with questions, anger, and memories of a life she thought she'd buried alongside Adrian. Now, as she stood on the deck of the Starlight Serenade watching the sunrise streak the horizon with shades of gold and pink, her thoughts turned to her children. Ethan and Ava, her twins, her strength, her reason for enduring 7 long years of hardship. Every sacrifice she'd made, every sleepless night, every painful decision had been for them. She had left them in the care of her friend Sophie, the only person Lena trusted completely. Leaving them behind had been the hardest choice of her life, but the promise of paying off her debts and securing a stable future had outweighed the agony of separation. Now, seeing Adrian alive added a new layer of urgency. He wasn't just a ghost from her past. He was the reason her children had grown up without a father, why they had spent years living on the edge of poverty while he basked in luxury. She clenched the railing of the ship, the cool metal grounding her. Her thoughts churned with one burning question: why? Why had Adrian faked his death? Why had he left her to suffer? And why, in all these years, had he never reached out? The anger that simmered beneath her grief began to take shape as resolve. It wasn't just about confronting him for answers anymore. It was about protecting her children from the life she had barely escaped. If Adrian thought he could walk away from his responsibilities, he was sorely mistaken. As the morning bustle of the ship began, Lena returned to the staff quarters. Her colleagues were already preparing for the day's events, but Lena's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't afford to let her emotions consume her during her shift. She needed to keep her head down, blend into the background, and bide her time until she could confront Adrian again. By the afternoon, Lena found herself back in the opulent dining hall, serving drinks and hors d'oeuvres to the ship's wealthy passengers. She moved mechanically, her gaze scanning the room for Adrian. When she spotted him seated at a table with the same glamorous woman from the night before, her chest tightened. This time, she forced herself to approach. Her tray felt heavier with each step, her heart beat loud in her ears. As she neared their table, Adrian glanced up, and their eyes met. For a brief moment, Lena thought she saw a flicker of recognition, guilt, even, in his expression. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a cold detachment. "Your drinks," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. The woman looked at Lena with mild annoyance, waving her off dismissively. Adrian didn't say a word. The encounter left Lena more determined than ever. He wasn't going to acknowledge her, wasn't going to admit the truth. Fine. She would make him. That evening, after her shift ended, Lena returned to her small cabin and pulled out her phone. She stared at the photo of Ethan and Ava she kept as her wallpaper, a candid shot of them laughing together at the park. Ethan, with his messy brown hair and mischievous grin, looked so much like Adrian it hurt. Ava, always the quieter of the two, had her arms around her brother, her big brown eyes filled with trust and "I promise you a better life," Lena whispered, her voice breaking. "And I won't let him take that from us." Her fingers hesitated over the screen before dialing a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Lena? Hi, Nate," she said, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I need your help." Nate had been Adrian's closest friend back when they were married. After Adrian's death, he had been a lifeline for Lena, helping her navigate the financial mess Adrian had left behind. But they had lost touch over the years, life pulling them in different directions. "I found him," Lena said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. "Adrian. He's alive!" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure? Nate finally asked, his voice cautious. I saw him with my own eyes. He's here on this ship. Lena. Nate's tone was heavy with disbelief and something else, concern. If he's alive, he's been hiding for a reason. You need to be careful. I don't care why he's hiding, Lena snapped, her frustration boiling over. He abandoned me. He abandoned our kids. He left us to suffer while he... Her voice broke, and she took a shaky breath. I just need to know the truth, Nate. I can't let him get away with this. Nate sighed. Okay. Tell me everything you know. I'll see what I can dig up. As Lena recounted the details of her encounter with Adrian, a plan began to form in her mind. She wasn't just going to confront him, she was going to uncover the secrets he had worked so hard to bury. For her children. For herself. She had spent 7 years fighting to survive. Now, it was time to fight for justice. The following day dawned with golden rays glinting off the vast expanse of ocean. On board the Aurora Majesty, the cruise ship exuded its usual air of extravagance. Wealthy passengers strolled the polished decks, sipping champagne and reveling in the endless luxuries offered at every turn. For Lena, however, the day felt like a gauntlet. The dining hall shimmered with opulence, crystal chandeliers, gilded railings, and pristine white tablecloths. As a waitress, Lena had become adept at moving unnoticed through the grandeur, her presence blending seamlessly into the background. But today, her eyes were sharper, her mind more focused. She had a goal: gather as much information about Adrian as she could. As Lena worked her shift, she kept a wary eye on him. He was seated in the same spot as yesterday, laughing with the glamorous woman who clung to his arm. They seemed oblivious to the world around them, their behavior a painful contrast to the struggles Lena had endured for years. Who was this woman? Lena's mind churned with questions. Was she Adrian's partner? An accomplice in his betrayal? Or just another pawn in whatever game he was playing? Lena! A voice interrupted her thoughts, snapping her back to the present. It was Sophia, one of the other waitresses. Table 5 is asking for a refill. You okay? Lena forced a smile. Yeah, just a little distracted. Thanks, Sophia. She moved to table 5, but her mind remained elsewhere. By the time her shift ended, Lena had made up her mind. She needed to learn more about Adrian's life, and who he had become since the day he was supposed to have died. In the quiet solitude of her cabin, Lena opened her small notebook, the one she used to jot down her children's milestones or future plans. Now, it became a space to piece together the fragments of Adrian's new life. She listed what little she knew. Adrian was now using the name Andrew Cross. He was traveling with a woman named Camille, as indicated on the guest list. He had the appearance of a wealthy man, seamlessly fitting into the ship's elite clientele. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Lena decided to dig deeper. The ship had a small passenger library with public terminals available for internet access. The next morning, she used her break to slip away unnoticed and research the name. Andrew Cross. What she found left her both stunned and furious. Adrian, or Andrew, was a high-profile investor known for his extravagant lifestyle and connections to powerful people. His name was linked to various ventures, but a few articles hinted at scandals, accusations of fraud, questionable business dealings, and sudden disappearances of assets tied to his investments. Lena's hands trembled as she scrolled through the information. The man she had once loved, the man who had left her to fend for herself, was thriving on a mountain of lies. Her fury grew as she thought about Ethan and Ava. They had gone to bed hungry on more nights than she could count, while Adrian dined in luxury. They had worn second-hand clothes and made do with hand-me-down toys, while he lavished his wealth on fine suits and extravagant vacations. That night Lena worked her shift with renewed determination. As she moved through the dining hall, she observed Adrian carefully, noting every detail she could about his behavior. He seemed relaxed, as if he had no reason to fear discovery. But Lena knew better. She wasn't the same woman he had left behind all those years ago. After dinner, Lena lingered near the dining hall, waiting for the right moment. When Adrian finally stepped out with Camille, Lena approached. "Andrew," she said, her voice steady but cold. Adrian turned, his expression faltering for the briefest moment. Camille looked between them, her confusion evident. "I need to speak with you," Lena continued, ignoring Camille's presence. Adrian straightened, his composed mask slipping into place. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," he said tersely. "Don't we?" Lena shot back, her voice rising. 7 years, Adrian. 7 years of wondering what happened, of struggling to survive while you lived like this. She gestured around the lavish ship. "Don't you think I deserve some answers?" Camille's gaze narrowed. "Who is this woman, Andrew?" Lena's eyes didn't leave Adrian's face. "Tell her," she demanded. "Tell her who I am. Or do you not have the courage to admit it?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time or place," he said, his tone clipped. "No," Lena said, her anger boiling over. "You don't get to decide that. Not after everything you've done." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You owe me, Adrian. And you owe our children. You can't run from this anymore." Adrian's eyes flickered with something, fear, perhaps, or guilt. But before he could respond, Camille grabbed his arm and pulled him away. Lena watched them go, her heart pounding. The confrontation hadn't gone as planned, but it was a start. Adrian was rattled, and she wasn't going to stop until she uncovered the full truth. Later that night, as Lena lay in her cabin, staring at the photo of Ethan and Ava, she whispered a silent promise. "I'll make this right. For us." The days that followed were a blur of routine, serving drinks, clearing tables, and pretending that nothing was wrong. But Lena's mind never strayed far from Adrian, or from the confrontation that had been building since she first laid eyes on him again. She was consumed with the need for answers, but the more she observed him, the more she felt the weight of the unfinished business between them. It was late one evening when Lena saw her opportunity. Adrian and Camille were walking toward the grand ballroom for an event, and they were alone, no other guests, no distractions. It was now or never. Her pulse quickened as she moved through the bustling ship, each step carrying her closer to the moment that would either shatter her or bring some semblance of closure. She found herself standing just outside the ballroom doors, breath steadying as she watched Adrian laugh, his posture relaxed as if he had no care in the world. Camille was talking animatedly, but Adrian's attention seemed elsewhere, lost in the sound of her voice. Lena's feet moved before she could think, the space between them shrinking quickly. She stepped into the path of the couple just as they were about to enter the ballroom. "Andrew." Lena's voice rang out, unmistakable in its demand. Adrian froze. For a moment, his face betrayed nothing but a flicker of recognition, a flash of guilt, perhaps, but it was gone almost instantly, replaced by a coldness that made Lena's stomach tighten. Camille, startled, looked between the two of them, her confusion palpable. "Who the hell is this?" Camille asked, her tone sharp. Lena didn't look at her. She had eyes only for Adrian. "You know exactly who I am," Lena said, her voice trembling but determined. "You left me. You faked your death and left me to suffer. For 7 years I've had nothing but silence while you—" Her voice broke, but she pushed through it. "While you lived in luxury." Adrian's jaw clenched, and his gaze turned cold. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. "We have nothing to discuss." "Don't I deserve some answers?" Lena pressed, feeling the heat of her anger rise again. "You left me alone with our children, Adrian. You didn't even give me a chance to say goodbye. You didn't give me any closure. And now you think you can just waltz back into my life as if nothing happened?" Camille stepped forward, her gaze hard. "Andrew, what's going on? Who is she?" Adrian turned to Camille, his demeanor shifting. "It's not important," he said, his voice laced with impatience. "Just forget it. Let's go inside." But Camille didn't seem convinced. Lena, her heart pounding in her chest, didn't back down. You don't get to decide that, she snapped, her voice rising. You don't get to walk away from what you've done. You have children, Adrian. Children who have been growing up without their father because you decided they weren't worth your time. You left us to drown in debt, to survive on nothing while you were living the high life. The words stung, each one like a cut to her soul. But Lena didn't care anymore. It was the truth. He had abandoned them, and he needed to hear it, needed to face what he had done. For the first time, Adrian's cool facade cracked. His eyes darkened with, Andrew, I don't know what this is, but it's not my problem, she said sharply, her voice full of disdain for Lena. Let's go. She reached for Adrian's arm, pulling him away with an air of finality. Lena stood frozen, watching as they walked into the ballroom without a second glance. Her chest tightened with frustration, but also with a deep sense of finality. This wasn't over. She would not let Adrian walk away from his past and from his responsibilities. He could run, but he couldn't hide forever. In the quiet of the hallway, Lena leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. The confrontation had been everything she had hoped for, and yet nothing like what she had imagined. She had thought she would feel relief, even some sense of victory, but instead, she felt drained, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. But then, as if to reaffirm her resolve, she heard a voice in her ear, soft but steady. It was Nate, the only person she could still trust with her plan. He had been quiet for days after their initial conversation, and Lena had almost forgotten about their arrangement. But now, her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she retrieved it, seeing his message. Meet me tomorrow night. I have what you need. Lena's breath caught. She quickly typed a response. I'm coming. She stood up straighter, brushing off the remnants of doubt. She would not let Adrian destroy the future she was working so hard to build for her children. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let him get away with it, not now, not ever. The hours leading up to the meeting with Nate felt interminable. Lena moved through the ship with a quiet urgency, the weight of her resolve pressing heavily on her chest. Every time she crossed paths with Adrian, her heart raced, but she made sure her face remained calm, collected. No one could know the storm brewing inside her. That evening, after her shift, Lena made her way to the lower levels of the ship, where the less glamorous parts of the cruise lay hidden. It was here, in the staff quarters, that she had arranged to meet Nate. He had been a crew member for a few years now, a tech specialist who had kept his distance from the drama surrounding the ship's wealthier passengers. He wasn't the type to get involved, but after learning of Lena's past and her connection to Adrian, he'd offered his help. When Lena reached the designated location, an unassuming staff lounge tucked away from the main areas, Nate was already waiting. He was seated at one of the tables, a laptop open in front of him. His face was lit by the soft glow of the screen, his expression serious. You're here, he said quietly, as if speaking any louder would make the moment too real. Lena took a seat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I need everything you've got on Adrian, she said, her voice low but firm. The name he's using, the companies he's involved with, the people he's connected to, everything. I don't care how far back it goes. Nate nodded, his fingers moving over the keyboard with practiced speed. I've been digging for a while now, he said. You won't like everything I've found, but you need to know. I got into some of his financial records, and I found traces of transactions, shell companies, and... He paused, looking up at Lena with a concerned expression. And connections to some pretty shady people. He's involved in some major financial fraud, Lena. Real dirty stuff. Lena's pulse quickened. I knew it, she muttered under her breath. She had felt it in her bones when she first uncovered Adrian's new identity, and now the truth was becoming clear. How deep does it go? Nate paused again, his eyes flickering to the screen as he scrolled through the information. Very deep. He's tied to several offshore accounts, all of them linked to entities that don't show up on any legitimate records. There are also some payments to people with criminal backgrounds, extortionists, money launderers, even some hitmen. Lena's stomach churned. It wasn't just that Adrian had faked his death and abandoned her and their children. He had used his position of wealth to entangle himself in illegal operations, perpetuating harm in ways she couldn't have imagined. "Do you have everything on him?" she asked, her voice tight with the weight of what she was about to do. "Everything I need to take him down?" Nate closed the laptop with a soft click, then slid a small USB drive across the table. "It's all on there. The full picture, the accounts, the names, the transactions. But Lena, you should know, this is bigger than just Adrian. There are people involved who won't hesitate to silence anyone who gets in their way. Be careful." Lena looked down at the drive, her fingers brushing against it. A surge of determination filled her. She wasn't scared. She couldn't be. Not when everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for, was on the line. "I don't care who's involved," she said, her voice steady. "Adrian has to pay for what he's done. Not just to me, but to everyone he's hurt along the way." Nate gave her a long, searching look before nodding. "Then I'm with you. Just don't get yourself caught up in something you can't control." Lena tucked the drive into her bag, standing up from the table. She had a plan now. It wasn't just about exposing Adrian, it was about taking everything from him. The years of pain, the suffering, the lies. She was going to make sure he would never again be able to run away from the consequences of his actions. As she left the staff lounge, she felt the weight of her mission settle over her. The ship's gleaming luxury felt even more oppressive now, as if every inch of its opulence were mocking her. She could almost feel Adrian's presence everywhere she went. His betrayal was woven into the very fabric of this floating palace, and Lena would tear it all apart, piece by piece. That night, after the final dinner service had ended and the passengers had retired to their rooms, Lena made her way to the ship's small private office. There, she accessed a terminal, slipping the USB drive into the port. The files appeared on the screen, and Lena's heart beat faster as she scrolled through the evidence. Adrian's fraud was extensive, millions of dollars funneled to fake businesses and hidden accounts. The scope of his operations was far beyond anything she had imagined. But there it was, undeniable and real. Adrian Cross, the man she once loved, was nothing but a criminal mastermind. And now, she had the tools to bring him down. Lena leaned back in the chair, a sense of calm washing over her. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she could finally take control of her life, and her children's future. She wasn't just a waitress on a cruise ship anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, and nothing was going to stop her. Tomorrow, everything would change. The following day felt heavy, as though the weight of the world had shifted onto Lena's shoulders. The evidence she had gathered from Nate's research had given her the leverage she needed, but it also came with an undeniable truth: taking down Adrian was not going to be easy. He wasn't just any man. He was a man with connections, with resources, and with power. The risk was enormous, but Lena had no choice. This was her one shot at getting back everything she and her children had lost. She waited until the evening when the ship's crew was preparing for another extravagant gala for the wealthy passengers. The high society was already gathering in the grand ballroom, their laughter and clinking glasses echoing through the halls. But Lena wasn't thinking about the festivities. She had a different kind of meeting planned. In the dimly lit hallway behind the kitchen, she met with the loan sharks who had been harassing her for months. The men were dressed casually, their eyes scanning the area with practiced wariness, but their faces betrayed interest when they saw Lena. She had made a deal with them, a dangerous one, but it was the only option left. "Are you sure about this?" one of them asked, his voice low as he leaned against the wall. It was Marco, the one who had given her the ultimatum months ago, and he had the look of someone who had seen it all. "I'm sure," Lena replied, her voice steely with determination. "You get Adrian, and I get my debts wiped clean. No more threats, no more calls. This is the way it has to be." The men exchanged looks, their eyes calculating. Marco stepped closer, his gaze cold. "You understand what you're asking, don't you? Adrian isn't just some guy you can push around. He's got ties to people who wouldn't hesitate to make things difficult for you." This isn't just about money anymore. I know exactly what I'm asking. Lena replied, her voice unwavering. But I've already lived through hell. I've already lost everything once. I'm not walking away from this now. You helped me get him, and I'll make sure you get your cut. The tension in the air was palpable. Marco eyed her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, with a sharp nod, he spoke. All right. We'll get what we need. But don't say we didn't warn you. Lena felt a wave of anxiety wash over her, but she kept her face composed. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her children. About getting justice. She couldn't afford to back down, not when everything she had been through was on the line. I trust you'll handle it, she said, her voice calm but filled with finality. I want him gone. You know what to do. The loan sharks nodded, and with that, they turned and disappeared into the shadows. Lena took a deep breath and forced herself to remain steady. It was done. There was no turning back. That night, as the ship sailed through the quiet, starless sea, Lena couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at her. She had put her trust in dangerous people, and while the deal might secure her freedom, it also meant risking her safety, and her children's. But she didn't have time to second-guess herself. The storm was already brewing, and it was too late to stop it. She could only hope that the men she had bargained with would hold up their end of the deal. The next morning, the ship was thrown into chaos. The sudden arrival of security officers, who escorted Adrian off the ship in handcuffs, sent ripples through the luxurious corridors. Guests whispered behind their hands, their curiosity piqued by the spectacle, while Lena remained hidden in the shadows, watching from a distance. Her heart pounded in her chest as she observed Adrian's fall from grace. He had once stood tall, a man of power and wealth, but now he was nothing more than a criminal being led away by the authorities. The man who had betrayed her was now at the mercy of the system, and for the first time in years, Lena felt a strange sense of satisfaction. But even as the ship's atmosphere shifted, Lena knew the fight wasn't over. She had won the first battle, but there was still much more to be done. The criminal network Adrian had built was vast, and it wouldn't take long for him to realize that someone had been behind his downfall. The consequences of his exposure were only beginning. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she took a deep breath, but she refused to let fear take over. She had come too far. The next phase of her plan would require every ounce of courage she had left. But for now, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Lena allowed herself a small moment of triumph. She had done it. Adrian's reign was over. And as she stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, she knew that nothing, no one, could take away the power she had just reclaimed. The road ahead would be dangerous, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had made her deal, and now it was time to see it through. Lena had always known the moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. Watching Adrian, the man who had destroyed her life and abandoned her children, led away in handcuffs was surreal. The glitz and glamour of the cruise ship, with its rich passengers and endless wealth, felt suddenly hollow. The luxurious atmosphere seemed to mock her suffering. As the ship's security team escorted Adrian through the hallways, Lena stayed hidden in the shadows. She had never felt so alive with a mix of triumph and terror. This was her victory, his downfall, but there was no joy in it. She couldn't afford to feel anything other than determination. Adrian's arrest had sent shockwaves through the ship. Guests watched in disbelief, murmuring to each other, unable to grasp the truth behind the spectacle. Lena could hear their hushed voices from where she stood, tucked behind the corner near the staff entrance. Her heart raced in her chest as the guards ushered Adrian toward the lower decks, their firm grip on his arms emphasizing the finality of what was happening. He was no longer the powerful man who had left her to fight for survival. He was a criminal, his empire crumbling before him. For a fleeting moment, Lena closed her eyes, remembering the man she had once loved, before everything went wrong. But there was no time for sentimentality now. She had made the choice to take him down, and it had paid off. As soon as Adrian was gone, Lena retreated to her quarters. She didn't want to be seen. People would talk, and it was better to stay out of the limelight for now. Besides, she had no desire to bask in the drama of Adrian's arrest. She was already thinking about the next steps, what came after this victory. Sitting on the small cot in her room, Lena took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. Her plan had worked, but it was far from over. Adrian was only one piece of the puzzle. The criminal empire he had built, with its corrupt deals and shady connections, was still out there. He had worked with powerful people, and she knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. Lena had to act quickly. She couldn't afford to wait for retaliation. She needed to ensure that Adrian's arrest would lead to the dismantling of his operations. But as she sat in the dim light of her cabin, the weight of what she had just done pressed on her. It was done, but the journey wasn't over. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The cruise continued as scheduled, but the mood had shifted. While the passengers tried to carry on with their lavish celebrations, whispers of Adrian's arrest spread like wildfire. For the first time, Lena allowed herself to slip into the crowds unnoticed. She kept her distance, observing the ship's passengers and crew as they speculated about the scandal. No one knew the full truth, and Lena was determined to keep it that way. In the coming days, Lena received word that the investigation into Adrian's financial crimes was growing. The evidence she had provided to the authorities was enough to open the floodgates. Adrian's assets were being seized, and his connections were being traced. The investigation was about to reach a point where it could no longer be ignored. And Lena knew the danger was far from over. There was one person she still needed to confront. The woman who had stood beside Adrian all these years. The woman who had helped him orchestrate his disappearance. Claudia. Lena had been avoiding her, keeping a low profile, but she couldn't ignore the fact that Claudia might have been just as complicit in Adrian's schemes. She had been the one person who had known everything, his secrets, his lies, and the identity he had stolen. If Lena was going to truly get the justice she deserved, she had to confront Claudia. Claudia had been at the center of the ship's most exclusive events, often seen by Adrian's side, draped in designer gowns, with a smile that could charm anyone. But Lena saw through it. She had seen the coldness in Claudia's eyes, the way she had watched Lena from afar, perhaps even knowing the truth of what Adrian had done. One evening, Lena found herself standing outside the upscale lounge where Claudia often spent her time, mingling with the rich and famous. The door was slightly ajar, and through the glass, Lena could see Claudia laughing with a group of passengers, her voice light and carefree. The contrast between Claudia's calm exterior and Lena's rising fury couldn't have been more stark. Taking a deep breath, Lena pushed the door open. The moment Claudia noticed her, the smile on her face faltered. It was the briefest of pauses, but Lena could see the recognition in Claudia's eyes. "You," Claudia said, her voice barely above a whisper. The confidence in her voice was replaced by a hint of unease. She quickly masked it with a smile, but Lena wasn't fooled. "Claudia," Lena replied coolly, stepping into the room. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "We need to talk." Claudia's eyes flicked nervously around the room, as if seeking an escape. But there was no getting out of this now. "You know what I'm here for," Lena said, her tone sharp and deliberate. "You knew what Adrian was doing, didn't you? You helped him cover up his death, his crimes, his lies. All these years, you've been living a life built on the back of his deception." Claudia's expression shifted, first to disbelief, then to anger. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to regain some semblance of control. "You don't know anything," she spat. "Adrian and I have nothing to do with you anymore. Whatever he's done, whatever happens, that's between him and the authorities. You're wasting your time." Lena stepped closer, her voice unwavering. "I'm not wasting my time. You're going to answer for everything. I'm going to make sure of it. You'll face the consequences, just like he will." Claudia took a step back, her face pale. She hadn't expected this confrontation, and now, with the walls closing in, Lena could see the cracks forming in her carefully constructed facade. For a long moment, the two women stared at each other, their silent battle of wills hanging in the air. Claudia knew Lena was serious, she could see it in her eyes. Finally, Claudia spoke, her voice low and resigned. You think you've won, don't you? But you don't understand. Adrian's not just some man you can take down. There are forces at play here you'll never fully comprehend. Lena didn't flinch. Maybe, she said softly, but I'll make sure you and Adrian pay for what you've done. You can't hide from the truth forever. With that, Lena turned and walked out, leaving Claudia standing alone in the center of the room. The ship's elegant atmosphere felt like a distant memory after the tense encounter with Claudia. Lena's mind raced with the weight of her conversation, the unspoken threat that Claudia had left hanging in the air. There was more to Adrian and his criminal empire than she had ever imagined. But Lena was no stranger to danger. She had faced the worst life had to offer already, and she wasn't about to back down now. That night, Lena lay awake in her small cabin, the sounds of the ocean crashing against the hull of the ship filling the silence. Her thoughts churned, replaying every word of her confrontation with Claudia. The woman's fear had been evident, but there was something else, too, something more dangerous lurking behind her sharp words. Lena couldn't ignore the fact that Claudia had been a part of Adrian's scheme for years, helping him maintain the illusion of his death while enjoying the fruits of his illegal empire. But how deep did her involvement go? As Lena drifted off to sleep, she vowed that she would uncover the full extent of Claudia's role in all of this. She couldn't allow someone like her to walk away unscathed, especially after everything she and her children had been through. The next day, Lena spent her time discreetly collecting more information about Claudia. She had to be careful. There were eyes everywhere on the ship. Claudia was a well-connected woman, with ties to the elite guests who sailed on the luxury cruise. Lena couldn't afford to make any missteps. With the help of Nate's earlier research, Lena had already gathered some troubling details about Claudia's connections to Adrian's criminal network. It wasn't just about the money. They had used their power to manipulate people, to cover up crimes, and to escape justice. Lena's investigation led her to an unexpected source, one of the ship's crew members, a young woman named Ava, who had worked closely with Claudia. Ava had been with the cruise line for several years and had seen the way Claudia moved in and out of circles of power, never staying in one place for too long. Ava, seemingly unaware of the depth of Lena's knowledge, had mentioned something about Claudia's secret meetings with certain passengers who were known to have ties to organized crime. Lena knew this was the break she had been waiting for. It was clear that Claudia wasn't just an accomplice, she was a key player in a far larger game. As Lena pieced together the fragments of information, she could feel the tension building. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous things became. But she couldn't stop now. By the time the ship docked in the next port, Lena had a plan. She would confront Claudia once more, but this time, she would do it with undeniable proof of Claudia's role in Adrian's fraudulent empire. She had enough evidence to expose her, and she intended to use it. But there was one last thing Lena needed. She needed to know where Claudia's loyalties truly lay. Was she still working for Adrian, or had she decided to cut ties and save herself? That evening, as the ship neared its next destination, Lena found herself in the opulent lounge once again. The room buzzed with excitement as the wealthy guests prepared for another extravagant event. But Lena wasn't interested in the glittering festivities. She had a score to settle. Claudia was seated at a corner table, engaged in conversation with a few of the ship's elite passengers. She had a glass of champagne in hand, laughing and playing the part of the charming socialite. But Lena could see the cracks in her carefully maintained composure. Her eyes were constantly darting around the room, as though she was waiting for something, or someone. Lena walked toward her with purpose, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she didn't hesitate. As she reached the table, Claudia's eyes locked onto hers. There was a flicker of recognition, then something more, fear. "Claudia," Lena said, her voice calm but resolute. "We need to talk." Claudia's face paled, but she didn't flinch. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," she replied, her voice tinged with coldness. "I've already told you everything you need to know. Whatever Adrian's done is none of your concern anymore." Lena's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Is that so? She asked, her tone sharp. Then explain this. She slid a file onto the table in front of Claudia, the contents clearly visible. Claudia's eyes widened as she looked at the documents, photographs, financial records, names. The evidence of Claudia's involvement with Adrian's criminal activities, some of it even linked to money laundering and blackmail, was undeniable. Claudia's fingers trembled as she reached for the file, her expression shifting from defiance to anxiety. Where did you get this? She whispered, her voice trembling. That doesn't matter, Lena said coolly, her gaze fixed on Claudia. What matters is that I'm giving you a chance. A chance to turn yourself in, to be part of the solution. Because if you don't, I'll make sure the world knows exactly what you've been doing all these years. Claudia looked up at Lena, a mix of fear and anger in her eyes. She was cornered, and there was nowhere for her to go. You think you can just threaten me? You think you've won? I don't need to threaten you, Lena replied calmly. The truth is on my side. And the truth always comes out. For a long moment, Claudia didn't speak. Then, with a bitter laugh, she pushed the file back toward Lena. You don't understand, she said, her voice low and filled with venom. This is bigger than you. Bigger than anything you can imagine. Adrian won't go down so easily. Lena leaned in, her eyes hard. Then I'll make sure he doesn't have the chance to hurt anyone else. And you'll go down with him. Claudia's eyes flickered with something, fear, recognition, maybe even regret, but she said nothing more. Lena stood up, leaving the file on the table. She knew she had won this battle. Claudia had no more power. It was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down on her. Lena didn't look back as she walked away. Her heart was heavy, but she knew this was the right thing to do. She had confronted the person who had been complicit in her suffering, and now she was one step closer to bringing down the criminal empire that had destroyed her family. As Lena made her way back to her cabin, she felt the weight of everything she had endured beginning to lift. The truth was in her hands, and it would set her free. The next few days on the cruise ship felt surreal to Lena. The weight of the confrontation with Claudia still lingered, but there was a growing sense of relief that came with knowing the truth was finally out. Her plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. As the ship sailed toward its final destination, Lena could feel the atmosphere around her shift. People were starting to whisper, rumors spreading like wildfire about the arrest of Adrian's associates. The sense of unease was palpable, but Lena couldn't allow herself to get lost in it. Her focus remained fixed on her children and the future she was about to create for them. The day the ship docked in the next port, Lena's heart raced with anticipation. She had spent so many years running on empty, battling debt, betrayal, and the constant weight of responsibility. But now, as she stood at the edge of the ship, the wind tugging at her hair, she realized that the life she had worked so hard to protect was finally within reach. The hardest part was over. She had taken down the man who had destroyed her family, and now, she could focus on rebuilding. Stepping off the gangway, Lena took a deep breath, the salty air filling her lungs as she was finally on solid ground again. As she moved through the bustling dock, her mind was already racing with plans for her next steps. The moment she set foot on land, she was going to make sure her children were safe and settled. The financial burden she had carried for so long had been lifted, and she was determined not to waste this second chance. The reunion with Jacob and Lily was nothing short of magical. She had expected their excitement, their questions, but nothing could have prepared her for the flood of emotions that overtook her as she saw them waiting for her at the terminal. Their faces lit up the moment they saw her, their smiles a balm to her battered soul. They were her reason for everything, her unwavering motivation through all the pain and hardship. "Mom!" Jacob shouted, running toward her with Lily close behind. Their laughter was the sweetest sound Lena had ever heard. She bent down to meet them, enveloping them in a tight hug, the tears she'd been holding back for so long finally escaping. "I miss you both so much," Lena whispered, brushing her hand over their heads. It was a moment of pure joy, a moment she would treasure for the rest of her life. After the emotional reunion, Lena and her children spent the afternoon together, taking in the sights of the port town. For the first time in years, Lena didn't feel like she was constantly on the edge of survival. She allowed herself to enjoy the simple pleasures, holding her children's hands as they strolled through the market, picking out small treats, and laughing together without a care in the world. It was a perfect day, and Lena felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in far too long. That evening, back in the comfort of their small apartment, Lena sat with Jacob and Lily, talking about their plans for the future. She promised them that things would be different now. No more debt collectors. No more constant fear. They were going to live a life free from the shadows of their past. "I'm going to work hard for us," Lena said, her voice full of determination. "But we're going to be okay. We're going to build something better, something all our own." Jacob looked at her with wide eyes. "Does that mean we don't have to worry anymore, Mom?" he asked, his voice small but hopeful. Lena smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "No more worrying, sweetheart. I promise." As they settled in for the night, Lena couldn't help but reflect on the long road that had led her here. It hadn't been easy, nothing had been. But every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of pain had brought her to this moment. A moment where she could finally look ahead without fear. A moment where she and her children could truly begin again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Lena found herself working hard to stabilize her new life. She enrolled Jacob and Lily in a local school, something she had dreamed of doing for so long. She also began looking for a stable job, something that would give her the financial independence she had been craving for years. The thought of having her own career, of not being tied to the whims of debt and desperation, was empowering. She had always been a fighter, but now she was fighting for her future, for her children's future. But as the days passed, Lena's mind occasionally drifted back to the wreckage Adrian had caused in her life. The man who had once been her husband, the man who had left her for dead, was still out there. His empire had crumbled, but there were always remnants of it, lurking in the shadows. Lena knew that she couldn't let her guard down completely. Her safety, and the safety of her children, depended on her vigilance. Yet, despite the lingering threats, Lena allowed herself to savor the small victories. She found herself laughing more with Jacob and Lily, something she hadn't done in years. They were healing together. And for the first time in a long while, Lena allowed herself to dream. She dreamt of a life where her children could grow up without the scars of their past, a life where they could thrive. She dreamt of a future where they didn't have to worry about what came next, where they could chase their dreams freely. Lena had fought for that future, and she wasn't going to stop now. As she tucked Jacob and Lily into bed that night, Lena whispered, "We're going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. Her past was behind her, and the future stretched out before them, bright and full of possibility. She had made it. And now, it was time to rebuild, to embrace the life she had fought so hard for. The journey wasn't over, but Lena was ready for whatever came next. With her children by her side, she was unstoppable. Lena's life had slowly started to settle into a new rhythm, but even in the calm, there was a lingering tension in the air. The arrest of Adrian and his associates had sent shockwaves through the criminal network he had built, but as Lena's life began to regain stability, she couldn't shake the sense that something still remained unresolved. Though the burden of debt had been lifted and her children were safe, the emotional scars of the past, of betrayal, loss, and the years she had spent fighting to survive, remained. The media had picked up the story of Adrian's downfall, his name plastered across headlines, his crimes exposed for the world to see. The police investigations were far from over, and Lena knew that Adrian's influence, though diminished, could still ripple through her life in unexpected ways. He was a dangerous man, and his reach extended far beyond what she had ever known. But for now, she was free. For now, she could focus on her children, on their future, without the shadow of Adrian looming over them. As the weeks passed, Lena spent more time reflecting on everything she had gone through. There had been moments when she had doubted herself, when she had felt the crushing weight of everything she had lost. But there had also been moments of quiet triumph, the small victories of getting through each day, the joy of seeing her children grow and thrive, the satisfaction of knowing that she had taken control of her life again. One evening, as she sat at the small kitchen table with Jacob and Lily, they were talking about their plans for the summer. Lena's heart swelled with pride as she listened to them talk about their hopes for the future. Jacob wanted to learn how to play the guitar, while Lily dreamed of becoming a writer. Lena could see the light in their eyes, the innocence and optimism that had been so hard to hold on to during the darkest days of their lives. She smiled softly, watching them. Her children were growing up, and with each passing day, they were leaving behind the trauma that had once defined their lives. They were free. Free from fear, free from the shadow of Adrian's cruelty. For the first time, Lena truly allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future where they could all be happy, where they could build their own dreams without the weight of the past holding them back. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Lena sat alone in the quiet of their small apartment, reflecting on everything that had led her here. She thought about the woman she had been 7 years ago, the young, hopeful wife of Adrian, full of dreams for the future. She thought about the pain and confusion of learning that he was gone, and the years of struggle that followed. She thought about the love she had once felt for him, and the anger that had replaced it when she had realized the depth of his betrayal. But even as those memories surfaced, Lena couldn't deny the strength that had come from those years of hardship. She had faced unimaginable challenges, and she had come out the other side, stronger and more resilient than she had ever been before. The woman who sat in that quiet apartment now was not the same woman who had once been lost in grief and despair. She was someone who had fought for her children, for her future, and who had won. Lena stood up, moving to the small window that overlooked the city streets below. The lights of the city shimmered in the distance, a reminder of all the possibilities that lay ahead. She had made it through the storm, and now she was ready to embrace whatever came next. She thought about the life she wanted to build, a life where her children could grow up without the baggage of their past, where they could chase their dreams and achieve their goals. A life where they were no longer defined by their circumstances, but by their own strength and determination. But as much as Lena was ready to look forward, she also knew that there would always be a part of her that would carry the weight of the past. The loss of Adrian, the years of struggle, the pain of being betrayed by the man she had once loved, it was all a part of who she was now. And while she had let go of the anger, while she had found peace, there would always be a piece of her that would carry those memories. Lena took a deep breath and let it out slowly, allowing herself to accept that the past was a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had survived. She had rebuilt her life. And now, she was finally free to live the way she had always dreamed. She turned away from the window, her heart full of hope for the future. There was still so much to do, so much to look forward to. And for the first time in years, Lena felt like she could finally breathe. She could finally exhale the burden that had weighed her down for so long. As she walked toward her bedroom, she paused for a moment at Jacob and Lily's door, peeking in to see them asleep, their faces peaceful and content. She smiled, a sense of calm washing over her. They were safe. They were loved. And that was all that mattered. The future was theirs to shape, and Lena knew that she would be there, every step of the way, to support them. Together they would create a new life, one built on hope, love, and resilience. For the first time in a long time, Lena truly believed in the power of second chances. And she was ready to embrace it with open arms. The days that followed Lena's moment of reflection felt like a new chapter in her life. The weight of the past had been lifted, and with each passing moment, she felt lighter. Lena knew that her journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges ahead, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. She was no longer shackled by fear or betrayal. The future was bright, and she was ready to step into it with confidence. The community around her had begun to notice the changes too. Neighbors who had once looked at her with pity or skepticism now saw her in a new light. She had rebuilt herself, and in doing so, had inspired those around her to believe that even the hardest of circumstances could be overcome. Lena had always been a quiet force, But now she radiated a calm strength, one that could not be ignored. She focused on her children, Jacob and Lily, who were flourishing in their new life. Their smiles grew brighter with every passing day, and their laughter echoed throughout the apartment, filling it with warmth and joy. Lena was there for every moment, whether it was helping Jacob with his guitar lessons or listening to Lily's stories about the characters she had invented in her imagination. It was the life she had always dreamed of, and though the memories of the past still lingered, they no longer had control over her. Lena's career took off as well. She found a stable job in the local community center, where she helped other single parents navigate the challenges she herself had faced. It was fulfilling work, and it gave her the opportunity to give back, to show others that they too could overcome their struggles. She began to form new friendships, connecting with women who had walked similar paths. Together, they formed a support network, offering advice and encouragement. It was a reminder that while the journey might be long and difficult, no one had to walk it alone. Despite her newfound peace, there was a nagging thought that remained in the back of Lena's mind: Adrian. She knew his downfall had been swift, his empire crumbling under the weight of his crimes. But she also knew that such men didn't disappear quietly. There were always remnants of their influence, hidden away in corners Lena could not reach. But even as these thoughts crossed her mind, she refused to let fear dictate her life any longer. She had made it through the worst, and she would not let anyone, least of all Adrian, take that away from her. One evening, as Lena sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the city skyline twinkle in the distance, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. She had come so far. She had fought for her family, for her children, and now she was free. The woman who had once been lost in the darkness of grief and betrayal had transformed into someone who had taken control of her fate. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living, truly living, with purpose and joy. Jacob and Lily ran to her from the living room, their laughter carrying through the apartment. They had been playing, their imaginations running wild, and in that moment, Lena felt a deep, unshakable sense of gratitude. She had fought for this, for their happiness, for their freedom, and now, it was all coming to fruition. "Mom, look at this!" Jacob said, showing her a new chord he had learned on the guitar. His hands moved with confidence, the notes ringing clear and true. Lena smiled proudly, her heart swelling with love. "You're getting better every day," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lily, not to be outdone, jumped up beside her brother, holding up a notebook. "I wrote a new story," she announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Lena leaned over to read the first few lines, her heart skipping a beat at the creativity her daughter displayed. "This is amazing, Lily," Lena praised. "You've got a real talent." The evening stretched on, filled with the simple joys of family, guitar strings strumming, stories being shared, and laughter echoing off the walls. It was a life Lena had once thought impossible, but now it was her reality. Later, as she tucked Jacob and Lily into bed, Lena kissed each of them on the forehead. She whispered the same words she had said so many times before, but this time, they felt different, more real. "I love you both so much. We're going to be okay." And as she turned off the light and closed the door behind her, Lena stood in the quiet of their home, feeling the weight of her words settle in her chest. They were okay. They had made it. She had made it. The future was no longer a daunting unknown. It was a canvas waiting to be filled with new memories, new dreams. Lena had survived the darkest of times, but now, she was free to live, truly live, on her own terms. And as she looked at the life she had built, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was ready. With her children by her side, Lena was unstoppable. The scars of the past might remain, but they no longer controlled her. She had reclaimed her power, her freedom, and her happiness. And with that, Lena finally embraced the life she had always dreamed of, one filled with love, resilience, and hope for the future. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the full story and for watching the video. Your support means the world to us. If you enjoyed the journey we've shared, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content. Your feedback is always appreciated, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for more stories, and thank you once again for being part of this incredible journey. See you in the next one.